Support for the Living Well with MS podcast is provided by Overcoming MS, a global charity registered in the United States, United Kingdom and Australia, whose mission is to educate, support and empower people with MS in evidence-based lifestyle and medication choices that can improve their health outcomes. Please visit our website at www.overcomingms.org to learn more about our work and hear directly from people around the world about the positive impact overcoming MS has made on their lives. Now, on to today's episode. In today's episode, we'll be talking about how lifestyle factors affect people with MS and research priorities in the field of MS. Today's guest is Gavin Giovannoni, a world-renowned academic neurologist specialising in multiple sclerosis, based at Barts and the London School of Medicine and Dentistry, Queen Mary University, London. Gavin's research is currently focused on the Epstein-Barr Virus as a possible cause of multiple sclerosis, MS-related neurodegeneration, biomarker discovery and validation, and MS clinical outcomes. So, Dr. Giovannoni, you have a world-renowned reputation in neurology. Could you share a bit about your background?
Yes, so my surname is Italian. My dad was second generation Italian and my mother was second generation English. Both were born in South Africa, and I grew up in Johannesburg, studied at the University of the Barts and actually did my specialization in neurology there before coming to London in 1993 to do a PhD at the National Hospital for Neurology and the Institute of Neurology at Queen Square. I did my research in immunology of MS in the CSF lab at the time under Ed Thompson, but I also worked for Ian MacDonald while I was there. Why did I get into MS? Well, I suppose you've got to ask why I got into neurology. I had this decision about doing hematology. I was always very interested in the immune system, and I was going to do hematology. But then I think I got exposed to neurology by a great teacher when I was a medical student, who made me want to do neurology clinically. And I think my interest in MS was because it was the commonest, or one of the commonest autoimmune diseases in neurology. And I think it kind of ticked the boxes for my interest in the immune system. And so when I got an offer to come do research in the UK on MS, I grabbed it, and that's how I ended up doing multiple sclerosis. So I've been in the field now since '93.
So you've seen a lot of changes then?
We've seen an enormous number of changes.
My father had MS, and that was in the 90s, and there was not an awful lot offered then.
Yes, I mean, I actually started in the field before there were disease-modifying treatments. And actually, when I started doing my PhD, that was just when the first interferon trial results came out. And, we didn't get treatment in this country for another 3 or 4 years, and even then, the treatment was very limited. So we only really got therapies into people with multiple sclerosis at a system-wide level across the country from around 2000 onwards, to be honest with you. So we have seen this the field go from just being diagnostic and managing the complications of the disease to seeing the first generation therapies, and we're now into our third, and we'll be going into our fourth generation of treatment. So we've seen the field completely transform.
And in what ways have you seen the MS clinical and research objectives shifting over the past decade?
So I think in the beginning, when I started, the disease was always considered autoimmune. In other words, your immune system goes awry and you'll attack self. And we've always thought the target has been myelin. I'm quite skeptical it is myelin. But I actually, over the last 2 decades, seen alternative hypotheses emerge. I think the fact that MS could still be could be due to a virus hasn't gone away. And actually the evidence it's probably got stronger that it may be viral, particularly in terms of causation. But even going on to the autoimmune hypothesis, we've seen a whole lot of therapies emerge and more evidence showing that these treatments make an enormous difference to people with MS. And I think in the beginning our target was basically to reduce the frequency, the number of relapses, and potentially the severity of the relapses. But now we've gone way beyond that, and our treatment target is now to try and render people free of disease activity completely. In other words, not only have them relapse-free, but to try and suppress the subclinical, the asymptomatic lesions on MRI completely. And some of us are even beginning to think beyond that now. We want to actually prevent the end organ, the brain and spinal cord, being damaged by microscopic disease. And so what we're actually beginning to target is actually trying to normalize what we call the brain volume loss, which is accelerated in people with multiple sclerosis. We want to get that into the normal range. So we're really taking MS into the same area that the rheumatologists have done with joints and the kidney doctors have done with kidneys. We're trying to get those joints and kidneys into old age. We're trying to get the brain and spinal cord into old age as normal as possible. So our treatment targets have become very ambitious and much more holistic in the sense. We're trying to do a lot more than we did, even 10 years ago.
And what about re-myelination and sort of, if you like, healing people who've already got the damage?
Yeah, so there is trials going on in that. There's been a lot of biology that's been unpacked, discovered around re-myelination. Now, my personal opinion is if you treat MS, early enough and effectively enough, you won't need re-myelination therapies because you prevent the damage from occurring in the first place. In people that already had damage and they've got disabilities and problems, we are beginning to do trials of therapies to promote remyelination in people with more advanced disease. And we'll probably get the results of the first big phase 3 study later on this year of a drug called high-dose biotin in people with more advanced disease to see if it improves function. So yes, we're going there, but I think what's important is not everybody will be responsive to these therapies because not everybody will have areas that are demyelinated. So it's not going to be a panacea. It'll be a small number of people that will benefit from remyelination therapies, in my opinion. And we've seen that in the phase, what we call the phase 2, the early development, is not everybody responds to these remyelination agents. I think because not everybody has ongoing demyelination. One thing we do know is if you suppress the inflammation and stop people having more lesions, and you prevent further inflammation from occurring, remyelination or recovery occurs spontaneously. So that's something to point out, is that if you treat this disease effectively with quite effective anti-inflammatory drugs, the brain and spinal cord recover on their own. You don't need to give therapies for them to recover.
Okay. So talking about the OMS approach, which includes medication as one of the pillars, but also do you see other lifestyle modification as being a part or an increasing role in patient care with MS?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I call this the holistic management of MS, and we now identify a whole lot of lifestyle factors that have been associated with negative lifestyle factors that make people with multiple sclerosis deteriorate much more rapidly. And we've also got evidence that positive lifestyle factors improve function. So if you really want to optimize the long-term outcome for people with MS, you have to focus on everything. And this is why I've been promoting the so-called marginal gains philosophy. You probably know about marginal gains. This is
like the cycling.
Yeah, David Brailsford's thing about how do you get the best out of your cycling team is, well, you've got to actually focus on every little detail and improve every little detail. So the problem we have in the NHS is that care often is fragmented. So a lot of the lifestyle stuff is not done by MS teams, in hospital environments, but done by the general practitioners. And even a lot of lifestyle interventions, have to be done even outside of the healthcare system. A lot of nutrition-based advice and nutritional therapies are not considered mainstream medical interventions. They're done outside of that. So this is why I think people with the disease have to be activated, and maybe not the right term, but have to be educated to self-manage and take on the lifestyle messages themselves.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting. I've been to some MS meetings for newly diagnosed people. I was quite shocked by the number of people who were not prepared to do anything, actually. They would take the tablet, but they wouldn't change their lifestyle in any way other than that. They wouldn't stop smoking, change what they ate, do any exercise. But yeah, I think you do certainly see a difference in the outcomes, having sort of met lots of different people. People, and actually, one of the factors that we talk about in MS is the sort of mental side of it. So that could be stress, reducing stress and mindfulness, but also the positivity. I think if you're, I think people who want to get better, it does seem to be just in the fact that you are trying everything and you actively want to get better, it does seem that those people have a better outcome.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's easy to blame people and point fingers at them for not sorting out their lifestyle. But there's a big body of evidence out there. We refer to them as the social determinants of health, and these are factors that play out at a population level, and they got to do with politics and social issues that are not. We kind of think they're in the hands of the individual, but they're not. This relates to inequality, poverty, educational attainment, and essentially hope. To be honest with you, there's a lot of people out there who are living in poverty. They haven't really had the education to understand the importance of lifestyle factors. And they really don't have any hope in the sense that they can't see anything positive in their lives. Now, you can blame those people at an individual level, but I think it's not their fault. It's a social issue. And the problem we have in the United Kingdom is that there's so much inequality. There's such a big difference between people in the top end of society and the bottom end of society. And unless we address those issues, it's going to be hard to get lifestyle interventions adopted. Across the socioeconomic spectrum. Whereas in other countries where there isn't inequality, so just take the Scandinavian or Nordic countries.
Well, this is going globally. The podcast is global, so yeah, we are talking to the world as such.
Yeah, so in those countries you can see, just give you an example, I've just come back from a meeting in Norway, the European Association of Neurology meeting. And in those Nordic countries where there is very little inequality, the adoption of lifestyle intervention is much greater than we have in the UK. And I suspect it's because they've got the social determinants of health sorted out at a population level. So and they do lots of interesting things at a policy level to encourage healthy lifestyles. It's difficult for that to happen at a population level in the United Kingdom. But anyway, if people are interested in reading about this, there's a fantastic book called The Health Gap by Michael Marmette, who is the professor of public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and he goes at UCL, and he goes through all these issues in detail in his book, and it's quite a profound observation how inequality drives a lot of disparities in health outcomes. And MS is no different. MS is just one of the diseases where these social determinants will have an impact.
And in other Western illnesses, if you like, heart disease, diabetes and so on, there does seem to be a lot more official guidance in lifestyle, in what you eat, the exercise you do and so on. And certainly like diabetes, obviously, there's a lot of encouragement, heart disease, a lot of encouragement. There doesn't seem to be that officially for MS, or it doesn't seem to be across the board. My neurologist does run sort of meetings for newly diagnosed people where he does encourage them to eat a sensible diet, do some exercise, reduce stress and these things. But it doesn't seem to be an official in this country, the NHS, but equally in America, Australia, other countries, there doesn't seem to be an official guidance that they would necessarily have in something like heart disease or diabetes. Why do you think that's the case? And do you think that's likely to change?
Yeah, I think it's got to do with the evidence base. We always told to practice evidence-based medicine, and I think the evidence base in cardiovascular disease is, much firmer. There have been, population-based studies. The problem about these studies, though, they don't prove causation. They're just associations. In other words, you can't actually take. It's very difficult to do lifestyle intervention studies in terms of randomization. You randomize somebody to this lifestyle intervention and somebody to that, because it's not like giving a drug and a placebo. It's hard to give a lifestyle intervention as a placebo. So a lot of the evidence that has accrued in the cardiovascular disease has accrued over the last 50 to 60 years. And so they're much more confident about the link between lifestyle factors and cardiovascular outcomes. Whereas in the MS space, to be honest with you, there isn't really what we would call class 1 or even class 2 evidence about these things. But my personal opinion is it's not about that. It's about general health anyway. We should be promoting general health in anybody with a chronic disease, particularly as we now know that people with multiple sclerosis are much more likely to have so-called comorbidities, cardiovascular comorbidities. They're much more likely to be hypertensive, overweight, dyslipidemia, get diabetes. This has been now well established. And so because of that, we as a neurology community should be promoting all these lifestyle interventions, because at the end of the day, those lifestyle diseases, in inverted commas, have been linked to a poorer outcome in MS. So it makes complete sense to target those and try and prevent them from occurring in the first place, or if you have them, to treat them quite aggressively to improve outcomes. This is part of our brain health message, to maximize lifelong brain health in people with multiple sclerosis. It's not just about treating MS, but it's about treating all those other aspects that will reduce brain health and obviously make MS worse.
That's similar to it. I put it to my neurologist and quite early on and said, I'm following this diet and lifestyle approach, which he calls the Jelinek approach, but after George Jelinek, who sort of founded OMS. And he said, well, there's not evidence that will ever, or wouldn't currently become mainstream. But having said that, if you follow that approach, healthy diet and lifestyle, you're less likely to get heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and numerous other things. And it might well improve your MS. So he said basically the thing to consider is don't spend loads of money on it. And then if you're happy to miss out on certain foods that you might be cutting back on, and you're happy to do the exercise, then all in all, it's not going to do you any harm, and you actually might find it's actually helped in another area like heart disease or something.
Yeah, so I completely agree. I mean, the George Jelinek approach is quite it requires quite a lot of self-discipline, and we know that self-discipline is rewarding itself. I mean, people who do live quite a disciplined life get self-reward from it. And so, whether it's the lifestyle intervention or the self-reward, people definitely feel better when they maintain a healthy lifestyle and stick to it. Now, I kind of agree that in terms of the dietary advice, we don't really have evidence, and I'm not 100% convinced any particular diet is better than another diet in the MS space. I think you just have to live a healthy diet, because the thing about food is it's not just about calories and nutrients. It's also about, food and eating plays a really important role in society. It's, we have a lot of traditions and rituals around food. And so, your diet has to be congruent with your social situation. I feel that if it's going to stop you eating and being social with your family and friends by sticking to a specific diet, that's not ideal. You really need to keep your social networks going, and a lot of social networks are linked to eating, and so you need to, your diet has to be congruent with your social situation. I keep telling my patients that, there's no point in going on a strict diet, and if it's going to cause problems in your family, for example, and so you need to be quite sensible about which diets you go on. I think from a scientific perspective, basic science, in terms of brain health, the diets that have been shown in animal models and in some human studies to actually protect the brain, neuroprotective, are calorie restriction, reducing calories to a very low level, which is not feasible in MS. I don't think calorie restriction is ideal because you need calories. And the other one's intermittent fasting and the ketogenic diet. So those two diets probably work in a similar way. They trigger these neuroprotective pathways in the brain and the body. There is now beginning to develop an evidence base, particularly with ketogenic diets in MS space. I've seen 2 studies by 2 different groups showing that people who are on ketogenic diets for intermittent fasting do better than those who are not. So I think those diets should be actually researched. And one of our therapies in MS, which is called dimethyl fumarate or Tecfidera, it stimulates pathways in the cells that are extremely similar to what ketogenic diets trigger. So I suspect there's an overlap between ketosis and the mode of action of dimethyl fumarate.
And just a very quick, because we want to get on to some of the research things as well, which is one of the key reasons I want to speak to you. But just very quickly on that point, with intermittent fasting, because I'm currently doing intermittent fasting on a 16/8 daily, so I don't eat anything until lunchtime.
Yeah,
and then don't eat after 8 in the evening. But there's all these different types. So there's the 5-2 where you don't have much to eat on 2 days a week. There's 16/8 where you don't have much to eat over 16 hours on a particular day. Is there any evidence that one of those is better than others, or some where they just have literally a water fast for a day? And there's all these different approaches.
No, I think at the moment we don't have any evidence, but I think what's common to all of these is they trigger ketogenic programs. They trigger the biological programs that causes your cells to go into what we call a low carbohydrate state. And, I think what's common to them is the metabolic pathways that get triggered and the neuroprotective pathways that get triggered. So, no, I don't. So I think that's what's common to them all.
So what you're saying, if you find something that fits in with your lifestyle, because that's why I find this works for me, because I can still eat with my family, I can eat with my friends. That doesn't affect me at all. I just don't have a breakfast really and have a slightly later lunch.
Yeah. Yeah,
so I've kind of got used to it. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other, and this is now not in the MS space, so this is just looking at longevity. There's been lots of studies on populations that live very long and healthy lives, and common to those diets is also low-calorie or very basic diets with quite a lot of calorie restriction or intermittent fasting in those populations as well. So outside of MS, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence supporting intermittent fasting or caloric restriction to extend lifespans. So I think the biology around caloric restriction, intermittent fasting is very interesting, and I think it's highly relevant to MS. Because our current food environment we live in is just abnormal. We most people are eating sugar, for example, or processed carbohydrates 24/7 essentially. We never we've forgotten how to be hungry. And I think if you look at the evolution of man, we didn't evolve in a food environment where we had calories on tap 24/7. So I actually think from an evolutionary perspective, we need to go back a little bit and just learn lessons about our biology. And I think this is relevant to people with MS. It's remarkable how many of my patients who, not me recommending it, come to me and say, I've been doing the intermittent fasting diet. or I'm doing a low carbohydrate diet and I feel so much better. There's so much, I'm beginning to find this in my clinic anecdotally, that these people come back and are extremely positive about it. But we do need to study it, and there are studies going on now, both in Europe and the United States, particularly North America, looking at these diets and their outcome in MS.
And can I ask, as I've got a specialist on the call, what are some of the most promising research frontiers, and where sort of MS research is going now? What does the future hold, do you think?
Yes, I think what we're doing is we're moving into combination therapy space. So, not just anti-inflammatory. There's a series of trials now with add-on so-called neuroprotective therapies. These are drugs to try and slow down the loss of nerve fibers that occurs. We've got the add-on re-myelination and neurorestoration trials. Some of us are looking into a more advanced disease. So these are people that already have major problems of lost, potentially lower limb function. And we're trying therapies, even wheelchair users, to try and protect upper limb function. And so that's even taking the treatments into a stage where we can't use them at the moment. You're probably aware that under the NHS, you're not eligible for any of the disease-modifying treatments if you've lost lower limb function, in other words, a wheelchair user. So that's what we would call next frontier's more advanced disease. And then there's a lot of environmental factors that are modifiable in terms of trying to prevent MS. And so the MS community is now looking towards doing prevention studies, taking high-risk people. So these are normally children or siblings, brothers and sisters of people with the disease who are at a much higher risk of getting the disease, and seeing if we can prevent them from getting MS. And the two main ones there would be vitamin D supplementation, and the other one is trying to prevent infection with the virus, Epstein-Barr virus, that is so strongly associated with MS. So, for me, those are those three things are the real excitement. Combination therapies, treating more advanced disease to protect upper limb function, and MS prevention studies.
And so that's prevention in family is one of the pillars of the OMS approach, actually. And I've got two children, and I give them vitamin D supplements. I often look at these sort of what are the potential benefits and what are the risks, and you think, okay, the risks of vitamin D, because they don't have much dairy anyway, so it's a limited amount of risk, because I was told, okay, the biggest risk is kidney stones. Vitamin D makes you more efficient.
That's actually false. It doesn't cause kidney stones. So that's based on a small study from India from the 1960s of kidney stones, and actually, if anything, it reduces kidney stones. The reason being is when you get very low vitamin D levels, you produce a hormone called parathyroid hormone, which mobilizes calcium from the skeleton, and that's some of that calcium goes out in the urine. So very low vitamin D levels, actually, you get more calcium in the urine. As soon as you go into vitamin D supplements and you suppress what they call the parathyroid hormone response, and actually the calcium levels in your urine go down, not up. So vitamin D, and most people now in the field think that the original report was not true, biased or false, and there is no evidence that vitamin D supplements cause kidney stones. Now, if you take vitamin D in combination with high doses of calcium, that's a different story. But the cause then is not the vitamin D, but the calcium. So our recommendations is, if you're going to take vitamin D supplements, particularly if you're healthy and young, there's no need to take calcium supplements in parallel. So we don't advise calcium supplementation.
Right. So that's sort of one thing I'm doing. So certainly the vitamin D for my children, but you also mentioned Epstein-Barr virus. Is there something that people can do independent of the research coming out? Is there anything that could be done actually to try and avoid that? I believe it's
no, unfortunately not.
It's just a virus that you can
It's a virus that's ubiquitous. By the time you're in your mid-30s, about 95% of the population get infected with the virus. It's transmitted from saliva because it's excreted in the saliva. and there's nothing you can do to avoid being infected with the virus. What may be useful is if people get infected when they're very young, but we don't know that. What happens is the transmission rates have changed. The real risk factors when you get the virus when you're much older, when you're a teenager, adolescent, or adult, and you get infectious mononucleosis or glandular fever, which is the symptomatic infection from Epstein-Barr virus. That's actually quite an important risk factor for MS. But you can't stop people getting that at the moment. So our idea with Epstein-Barr virus is actually to do a vaccine study to prevent you getting infected with it. But the vaccine is not ready yet for prime time. It's under development still. And we're hoping to have a vaccine in about 3 to 4 years' time that could potentially be put into trials to try and prevent people getting MS.
And are there likely to be any more treatments for people with progressive MS beyond, because ocrelizumab has recently become available? Is there more on the horizon for them?
Well, yeah, there's a drug in the secondary progressive space called siponimod, and now that we have got positive trials, the pharmaceutical industry are going to be doing more and more trials in progressive MS, because I think what we've learned from the ocrelizumab in primary progressive and the siponimod in secondary progressive is that we need to design our trials differently. They need to be obviously bigger, a little bit longer, and they need to be event-driven. In other words, in the past we did trials for, say, 2 years only. Now we let them run openly until people have had enough events. In other words, we know how to do the statistical powering of these studies. So I see a whole lot of other disease-modifying treatments emerging for progressive or more advanced disease. The difference there is the treatment effect is going to be lower simply because people have got quite a lot of disability already, and so they mustn't expect the same treatment response rates as they got in the early stages of the disease, because some of the treatment response is actually recovery of function, and these people have lost so many nerve fibers they won't get recovery of function.
And could I ask, to wrap this up, what's the most important advice that you'd give to someone today who's been newly diagnosed with MS?
Get yourself onto a treatment, a disease-modifying treatment, as soon as possible, and make sure you get monitored so your disease is controlled. In other words, if you're not responding to the particular disease-modifying treatment, you need to be on a more effective one. So it's about being treated to target. And also to take all those lifestyle issues very, very seriously. So they should read up about it. I would recommend reading our Brain Health Time Matters document, which is online, and that goes through all the important lifestyle issues.
And is that on the Barts?
No, there's actually a particular website that if you just Google Brain Health Time Matters, there's a specific website that you can download that document. But it talks about not smoking, making sure you exercise, get good sleep, making sure you go onto a healthy diet. It does mention a little bit about vitamin D supplementation. I think that's equivocal whether or not that makes any difference once you've got MS, but it's probably worth keeping yourself vitamin D replete, and to make sure that you get your comorbidities screened for. Make sure you get checked out for hypertension, etc. So it's basically looking at your life and doing everything you can to make sure you're as well as possible. That's what I'd recommend. And also, don't put your head in the sand. Don't ignore things. A lot of people with MS go into denial. That's a normal behavior when you get a diagnosis of chronic disease. But it's important that once you accept the diagnosis, is to read and keep yourself up to speed with what's happening.
Not to just blatantly plug you while you're on, but I think your Twitter feed is an excellent source of information to keep up to date. Actually, if anyone's on Twitter, but
yeah, so my personal opinion is if you really want to, find this is one of the problems. Other things about the internet, there's a lot of false information out there. So try and find yourself a reliable. Usually things like the MS Society, MS Trust, Shift MS. These people put out reliable information, but it's important that you don't just accept everything you read on the internet as being fact, and you question it and do a bit of research around it to make sure it's reliable information.
I'm very skeptical of someone who wants to take my money as well. I think if there's financial side of it involved, you start thinking I'm a lot more sceptical personally.
Yeah, we don't charge anything for our information.
No. And just on the medication thing, are you of the opinion to hit it hard, hit it early, or a wait and see approach?
No, definitely not wait and see. I mean, my personal opinion, I don't like the term hard. I think we just need to hit it early. Some people will be responders to drug X, other people will fail that and need drug Y. It's about effective therapy. So I rather say treat early and effectively could mean anything from what we call platform, second tier or third tier. It's basically finding out which treatment you're responsive to. So it's more to be about effective.
Okay, that's been very interesting, and thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
With that, I would like to thank you all for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Remember that there is a wealth of information at overcomingms.org, including show notes and an archive of all Living Well with MS episodes. Once again, that's overcomingms.org. There you can also find OMS-friendly recipes and exercise tips, connect with other OMSers in your local area through our OMS Circles programme, and learn about the latest research going on in the MS world generally and related to OMS specifically. I encourage you to register on the site and stay informed about the latest news and updates. I also encourage you to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode, and please feel free to share it with others who might find it of value. Let us know what you think about the podcast by leaving a review, and if you have ideas for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you, so please contact us via our website overcomingms.org. Thanks again for listening and for joining me on this journey to overcoming MS and living well with multiple sclerosis. I'm Jeff Alex, and I'll see you next time.